This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to Roots and All. This week's episode has no sponsor, so I thought I'd share a quick behind-the-scenes update. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for listening to and supporting the podcast. Thank you to the band of supporters on Patreon who stick with me and whose responses to my posts always make me smile. Thank you to those of you who've rated and reviewed the podcast. There have been some lovely comments on there and they reinforce my belief that I'm doing something good by putting out these weekly episodes. And thanks to those of you who've donated on GoFundMe. Emily, Tana, Lisa, I've only just been able to send you a thank you message as the site hasn't been working for me recently for some unfathomable reason. I'm hoping to invest the GoFundMe money into overhauling the website so it's a more useful resource. I've been trying to do this for over a year, but finding the right company who can do the work hasn't been easy. If you like the podcast and you find the content useful and you don't already support it financially, please could you do a few things for me? Could you firstly subscribe via whatever app you use to listen? And could you also rate and or review the podcast? Because in an increasingly busy online space, little independent podcasts like mine are in danger of being swallowed up by corporations who put out podcasts. Ratings and reviews help make Roots and All more visible to those looking for a podcast to listen to, and if you think it's useful, other people will too, and I'd like those people to be able to find it in the future. And finally, if you can't do any of the other things, will you be an advocate for the podcast? Will you tag a friend in one of my social media posts or share one so that more people have the opportunity to see the content? Or can you think of one person who might enjoy an episode and email them a link to it? Or even tell someone you meet about it? If you all share it with one person who you think might like the content, you'll be doing me a huge favour and maybe them too, as they might discover information about gardening they never knew existed. One of my upcoming guests described Roots and All as giving a platform to the quiet voices in horticulture. But those voices are only heard if others are prepared to amplify them. So please help me shout out on their behalf. Thank you. So after that long-winded intro, I bet you're begging for the ads to come back. On to this week's guest, Marlow Renton, who is the co-founder of Wild Food UK. Marlow talks about why we should all go out foraging, especially children, about how we can overcome our fear of wild food, particularly mushrooms, what to look out for, when to do it and where to do it responsibly, and how to get help if, like me, you're a bit of a wild food wuss. Marlow starts off talking about how he got into foraging.
Yeah, we started just after the 2008 recession. I used to run a web company in London, and it all got quite stressful through the recession, with lots of people going out of business, owing me money, and I decided I wasn't enjoying that anymore, and foraging was always a hobby of mine and my colleague Eric's, and we sort of got together and thought, let's see if we can. He was doing an engineering job at the time, which he wasn't enjoying too much either, and we thought we'd try and turn our what was sort of a joint hobby into something that we could make money out of. And so we kind of got the idea from we'd go out walking and picking mushrooms and that sort of thing, and with our friends they'd enjoy coming out with us. And then a friend of mine who lived in Cardiff, we were living in South London at the time, phoned me up and she said, "Look, Marlow, do you and Eric want to come to Cardiff and take us all for a walk, her and her friends, for a walk around Butte Park?" That's a beautiful, big, enormous park in Cardiff city centre. And because there's loads of mushrooms out and we want to know what they are. And we thought, okay. And she said, we'll pay for your travel and we'll put you up and we'll feed you while you're here. And we thought, yeah, may as well then. And so we did that, and then thought, well, if they were willing to pay, maybe other people will be. And Wild Food UK was sort of born there, really. We spent a year really studying up. We started taking out the general public, so, learning all the scientific names and just really brushing up on what was sort of a lifetime of knowledge anyway. But just making sure that we really knew what we were talking about. And then, started running courses locally, and then from there it grew to travelling around the country, and then from there it grew to training up instructors and writing a book about it. And at the moment we're UK wide. We run courses from Scotland to Dartmoor to down in Kent, and we're training up some new instructors, and we're writing a few new books, and really enjoying things. Don't quite earn as much money as I did in sort of the heyday of my web company in London, but I smile a lot more. It's a good change as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I bet. So you said it was like a lifetime hobby, and you had a lifelong passion for it, and you picked up stuff along the way. Did anybody spark the interest in it for you? How did you pick up information as you went along?
I don't know. For me, it was sort of a natural thing. I was quite lucky. When I was 11, we moved. I'm Scottish, and we moved up to near Stirling, and I went to my initial part of my secondary school there. And because it was just beautiful around there, the teachers used to take us out. And this one teacher knew about plants like pig nut, which is this really cool plant. If you dig it up, there's a nut on the root system that's really tasty, and showed us orchids and things like that. So I got a bit of an interest, or a bit of knowledge, I suppose, there, which I kind of carried forward. And I've always been an outdoorsy sort of person. I've always loved gardening and going for walks and learning about nature. And I've always food. If you mix the two things, you kind of end up foraging quite a lot, because when you find out that there's Portuguese and chanterelles in your local woods, it makes your local woods a lot more interesting. So I sort of picked it up. That's why we take out under 12-year-olds free on our courses, because if you get the bug early enough, it can be a really, really beneficial thing for your life. It's a good way to unwind. It's a good way to learn. It's a good way to connect with nature. As far as inspirational people, when I was sort of younger and first starting out foraging, there wasn't much of it around. There was a book called Food Free by this amazing guy called Richard Mabey, and that was kind of everyone back in the sort of late 80s and 90s. That was their foraging starter book, if you like. And then there's another guy called Roger Phillips, whose mushroom book back then was one of the only sort of mushroom books for the UK from a foraging point of view. And I found those books quite interesting and inspirational, really. And that's why Eric and I both, we sort of, when we wrote our book, we thought about what book would have suited us best, or what book would we have wanted when we first started foraging. And it was kind of almost a cross between those two books was what we thought, and that's what we tried to create with our foraging book. So those guys, Richard Mabey and Roger Phillips, I'd say those were the more inspirational people in my foraging life.
Oh yeah, I love that Roger Phillips book. I don't know if you can still get it. I know the last time I looked, which was a good few years ago, I think it was only second-hand copies, and they were really expensive.
It's gone into reprint.
Oh, has it?
There's a smaller version, because that's quite the ones that we had were big ones, but it's sort of a more reasonable sized book now, with a nice porcini mushroom on the front, which if you look really closely, you'll see there's a couple of maggots on it. I don't know if Roger knew that when he did the photo, but close look if you ever get that copy.
I'm gonna now, yeah. I'm gonna buy it just for that. Oh, that's so funny. So, well, following on from what you said then, I noticed from your book that you do mention the fact that it's important to take children foraging. So can you maybe elaborate on why you think that's such a good thing?
Well, I think it gives children a connection with two things that I don't know, I think was somewhat lost in the 80s and 90s, which is nature and food, where food comes from, because you wouldn't believe I know it's a cliche, but you wouldn't believe the amount of children that I meet at food festivals who say things like food comes from Tesco's, or I won't eat it if it's not in a packet, and things like that. So it gives children a connection with food, and the food process, if you like. And it also gives children a connection with nature, which is a good thing. It's people have studied gardening and how that has a beneficial effect on your life, on your mental well-being and all sorts of things. And foraging does exactly the same, except it's something you can do anywhere, not just in your own garden. You know, anytime you go for a walk anywhere in the country, you can normally find interesting things to pick or eat or talk to someone about. It's beneficial in those ways. Plus, really interested in it. It's something that you can treat as a lifetime of learning, because foraging encompasses things like botany and mycology, so the study of plants and mushrooms, and dendrology, which is the study of trees, and then you've got the cooking side of it as well, which is another thing you could do a master's degree in if you wanted to. And then you've got things like herbal medicine and folklore and history all wrapped up in there. So any one of those topics you could spend a lifetime learning about, but as a forager, you dip into all of them, and if you're interested in one more than the other at any given time, you kind of dip into that.
Yeah, and also I do think it's sort of related to children foraging, but you do seem to take a slightly more relaxed attitude to it than some other people whose books I've read about the whole foraging experience, in as much as I think that you kind of encourage people to not be absolutely terrified of eating the wrong thing. Obviously, you need to exercise caution, but you do seem, I think, just slightly more relaxed to it about it. So how easy is it to forage and not come a cropper?
Well, I've never poisoned myself or anyone else so far in any way. So, obviously I'm in a position of experience where I teach my own kind of experiences. And the first rule of foraging is really, really simple. So this is for adults and kids alike, full stop. If you don't know exactly what it is and that it's edible, just don't eat it. Wait until you do, and that gives you the little line of discovery, learning about plants and what you find. And then, secondly, with the younger children, we take them out, but we do not encourage them to pick anything and eat it themselves until they've got to a stage where the young children, we don't encourage them to eat anything, but as soon as a child gets to the stage where it can ask its parent, am I allowed to eat this, or ask a responsible adult, if they're with a responsible adult, whether I can eat this, then we think that it's about time they started learning. Because, in a simple sense, foraging is picking blackberries, and who's going to stop a sort of 10-year-old feasting on the blackberries when they're in the hedges and worry about that? And, with a bit of extra knowledge, all you're doing is giving yourself a sort of wider variety of blackberries, because we teach about things that we find very, very easily recognizable. So there's kind of different levels to foraging, and you can dip your toe in and just go for the really, really safe stuff, like blackberries, and you're not in any danger whatsoever. We always encourage people, if you're going to start thinking about picking wide varieties of mushrooms, then you really do need to know what you're doing first. As I said, never eat anything unless you're 100% sure what it is. But so far over the years, we've taken out, I think we're up to about 10,000 or more than 10,000 people that we've taken foraging over the last 10 years or so. And yeah, we've never made any mistakes with anyone yet. No one's been poisoned, and we've never had anyone come back to us afterwards say anything about their child doing anything apart from really enjoying the experience and taking it forward themselves. So I do think in Britain we've got a bit of a mycophobic culture. So as I said, blackberries, no parent's going to worry about their child picking blackberries, or, it not many anyway, but everyone worries about mushrooms in Britain, which is unusual. So the rest of the world sees us as kind of what they call a mycophobic culture, whereas in Europe, they'll take children out from a very young age picking mushrooms, because the reality that a lot of people don't understand in Britain is that you can't poison yourself by touching a mushroom, even a death cap, so touching them is not a problem. And then within the mushroom world in Britain, there's some that are unmistakable, like blackberries. So a giant puffball, for example, is a very easy mushroom to identify. There's nothing else in nature in Britain that grows as a big round white ball, maybe about 2 feet across, with sponge in the middle, and that's a really lovely edible mushroom, and you just can't mistake it for anything apart from maybe a football or a sheep, but that's not something you're likely to go and try and have a nibble of. And then in Europe, they teach children about the Belita family of mushrooms from a very early age, because it's a very safe family, which is easy to identify because there's sponge underneath the cap instead of gills like you get on your shop bought mushrooms. And in that family, all you've got to do to stay safe is stay away from the ones that are red on the outside and the ones that stain blue when you cut them in half. And those are simple rules that a child can follow. We teach children that holly berries are poisonous quite early on, and not many children eat holly berries because of that. And in the same way, you can teach kids, don't eat the red mushrooms, don't eat the ones that stain blue. And you cook mushrooms anyway, so it's not really ever a case of them picking them in the field and eating them. But in Britain as well, we've got other gourmet mushrooms. There's the hedgehog fungus, which is a mushroom that grows in almost every type of woodland in Britain, and it's so tasty. It's one of those kind of Michelin star mushrooms that they pay fortunes for in the shops and in Borough Market. You're talking about something like £50 a kilo for them. But they're called hedgehog fungus because they've got spikes under the cap. And there's no other white mushrooms in Britain that have spikes under the cap like a hedgehog. So, if you know that, and that's all you pick and you stick to looking for those, then you're an extremely safe forager. But Britain has, like I say, this kind of weird mycophobic culture where we're taught as children just to be scared of all mushrooms, and it's sort of partly through a lack of understanding. And I suppose that's what we try to, rather than being blasé and saying all kids should go out foraging, we try to teach an understanding. So education over fear is one of our things that we've said along that kind of line with regards to mushrooms. So children should be taken out foraging. They should help with the picking of the blackberries for the puddings, and if their teacher with them at the time knows a little bit more about more berries and plants and mushrooms, then that's certainly not going to hurt, because we're so blessed in Britain. We've got a green country pretty much all year round. There's no deserts, there's no ice caps, so there's always something interesting to go out and look at or pick in nature, apart from when it's howling with wind and rain and or everything's covered in snow, which obviously does happen in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, apart from obviously being careful about what you're picking and eating it, is there anything else that you need to be careful of when you're foraging? And I'm thinking probably about maybe doing it responsibly and where you can do it.
Oh yes, right, definitely. There's places where they don't particularly want you to forage, and in London that's much more of a problem than it is in pretty much the whole rest of the country. But that's due to the huge population of London and the footfall that all the green spaces around London have. And if there's too many people foraging in any spot around London, then it's just because of the weight of population. It can do damage to the green spaces. So in London, they've outlawed foraging in all of the great parks and Richmond Park and places like Epping Forest near to London, because they were just getting overpicked. And that is really mainly down to the amount of people in London. So when you get away from London, the rest of the country, as long as you're not somewhere special or protected, like there's places called SSSI sites, and they're all marked. They should all be signposted, and a SSSI site stands for a site of special scientific interest. And if you're on somewhere like that, or somewhere that's protected for birds or butterflies by the RSPB, then just take that into consideration as a forager. Don't forage from special places, because at the moment we're not foraging for survival reasons. That might change in the next few years depending on how things go, but at the moment we're foraging for fun and to enjoy nature. So if you're somewhere special where you don't want to interfere with nature in a protected place, just don't forage. Wait until you go into more commonly visited local woods and places that we call common land or public access land, where you're really only governed as a forager by the Countryside Act. And what the Countryside Act says is that from places that aren't protected, you can take what you want to from the 4Fs, that's the fruit, the flowers, the foliage and the fungus, but for personal consumption only. So that means moderate amounts, not picking to sell for a start. That's not something that you should do from anywhere in public access land unless you have real special permission to do so. From a safety point of view. So from that point of view, like I said, the long and the short of it is leave the special places alone as a forager. Just, not enough of Britain is left for nature and for science as well, if you like. So if you're somewhere special, then don't pick the berries and the mushrooms. Leave them for the insects and the birds, because that's what these special places are protected for. But from a safety point of view, the other things to consider are, where you're foraging. Obviously, the simple safety concerns, like if you're picking wild garlic from a steep riverbank, make sure you don't fall in the river, and don't go climbing elder trees to try and get to the berries, because they're not very strong and they'll probably break under you. But from a health and safety point of view, my biggest concern with foraging is a concern that all walkers should have in the UK, and that's ticks. So if you spend a lot of time in the woods in the UK, then there is a good chance that at some point you will get a tick. And if you do, you need to make sure that you examine the site where the tick has bitten you to check for any reddening or a bullseye target type of reddening in particular. And if so, you might have contracted Lyme's disease, which can be very, very serious. But if you go straight to the doctor and get the course of antibiotics that they'll give you, as long as it's within the first month or so of the tick bite, then it clears it up immediately with no ill effects most of the time. But if you let Lyme's disease from a tick bite just go, if you ignore the target, it's something that can affect you for life, really. So ticks, for me, they're I've disturbed a wasp's nest before and things like that by accident, but that's just a few stings. Ticks are something more serious because of that. And also picking from waterways. If you're picking plants in waterways, I always recommend cooking them, because you don't know what's a bit further upstream in that waterway. Stuff can get moved around chemical-wise, and there could be a dead sheep upstream or something like that. So I always advise, if you're picking from waterways, don't pick your salads from waterways, pick those from dry land.
It's very good advice. Yes, I agree. So I'm just thinking about people who might be inspired to go out foraging at the moment. Is there anything that people can be foraging for right now?
Okay, well, now is the start of the season for those giant puffballs that I was talking about. So if you want to dip your toe into the mushroom world, I wrote an article on the 10 safest mushrooms for anyone to go foraging for, and giant puffballs were number one. Because, as I said earlier, there's just nothing in nature in Britain that looks like a giant puffball. So look around in grassland, at the edges of fields, and occasionally in woodland too, for giant round white sponge balls. And if you find one, cut it in half, because if it's yellow on the inside, you shouldn't eat them. They've started to go to spore and they can make you a little bit sick. But if they're pure white all the way through, then take them home and make yourself giant puffball schnitzels, because they're fantastic. So what you do is cut yourself a little slab of giant puffball and fry it up with butter, salt and pepper. And then what you've got is a really tasty big slab of mushroom, but it goes a little bit floppy, like mushrooms do. So what you do is you take it off the heat, dip it in some egg and breadcrumb with a bit of salt and pepper, maybe some coriander seed on the outside, and then just brown that off in the same pan with some butter on both sides. Takes about 4 minutes, and what you've made is a giant puffball schnitzel, which tastes fantastic. It's the best tasting breaded mushroom you'll ever have. And then from the plant world and the fruit world, August, the beginning of August and through to the middle of August is the season in the UK for bilberries, which are our native blueberries. So if you like blueberries, bilberries, they're smaller and they're tastier, and they're abundant throughout the UK in woodland, and they're a really overlooked, really super tasty and really, really super healthy berry. So there's a couple of things for people to look for. The other thing in August that comes out a lot are the agaric mushrooms, the mushrooms that look like your portobello mushrooms. So field mushrooms and horse mushrooms fall into that group. And because they're ones that people recognise as very similar to ones in the shops, they're ones that people feel quite confident. So the agaric family, horse mushrooms and field mushrooms, if people want to check how to ID, I've got a YouTube channel and I've done videos on those mushrooms. And they're quite safe as long as you know about the one poisonous lookalike, which is called the yellow stainer. It's a mushroom that looks just like your portobellos, but when you damage the flesh, it goes bright yellow. And it also smells pretty horrible. So if you know those things, you can pick your horse mushrooms and your field mushrooms safely through most of August as well.
Brilliant. So before you go, I suppose it would be really handy if anyone's thinking about foraging and they are a bit nervous. I would probably include myself in that. You've got your YouTube channel. Where else can they go? What else can they do? And can you tell us what your YouTube channel is?
Oh, well, a YouTube channel, it was just put together to sort of supplement our website. So our website's got a guide to hundreds of mushrooms and plants, and we put videos into the pages about each mushroom, or the ones that I've managed to video so far. And we started getting lots of subscribers on YouTube, so we've been doing videos on there for about the last 7 years. So it's about 100 videos on different plants and mushrooms that you can go out foraging for and how to ID them safely. And our website goes into much more detail about that. So that's wildfooduk.com. But I've got to say that the best way for people to break that little confidence barrier is to go out on a course with someone like us or any of the other people that run courses that know what they're talking about. I know all of them. And that hands-on experience with somebody who can teach you in a hands-on way what a plant looks like, where it grows, what it smells like, what it tastes like. And once you've been hands-on, it kind of breaks that confidence barrier with the things that you've found on that course. You should hope be confident to go on and pick them for yourself. Courses, our website, and the YouTube channel, and YouTube in general is quite useful for identifying things if you don't know what you found. So, courses give you the confidence, or going out with anyone, actually, not just on a course, but with someone who knows what they're talking about. That helps.
I hope you've been inspired to get out and find some wild food for yourself. Thank you to Marlow for the interview. And again, thank you to you for listening. And please don't forget to rate, review and share the podcast with others. And as if our cabbages don't have enough to deal with, what with the caterpillars, here's Dr. Ian Bedford with yet another bug on a mission to massacre your brassica.
Growing our own vegetables requires some understanding of the different factors that can affect both the yield and its condition. Some of these, such as the weather, are beyond our control, but managing the others will be an essential part of the process. Whether it's preparing the ground, sowing, planting, weeding, feeding and watering, there'll be many important jobs that need to be done. But in addition to managing these regimented seasonal procedures, there's one more, not so clearly defined aspect that needs to be considered, and that's crop protection. Since every cultivar will attract its own specific assortment of herbivores, the creatures that we call the plant pests, because they too regard our vegetables as food. So by recognising these pests when they first appear, and knowing a little bit about their life cycles, we can decide on the right time and method for controlling them. Brassicas, for example, will attract many different pests, from pigeons and rabbits to a vast community of leaf-feeding invertebrates, who, if left unattended, can cause serious damage to the plants long before they're ready to harvest. But with these terrestrial pests, they and their damage can at least be seen, enabling some early action that can often save the crop. However, it's the pests that live underground, feeding on roots, that are more often the most problematic, since their presence is unlikely to be realised until the plant has been critically damaged. And so with these hidden pests, it's important to know their life cycle, since preventative control methods will have to be used rather than curative. And for brassicas, this will be the case for their most serious root-feeding pest, the maggots of the cabbage root fly. The adult flies first appear during spring, having hatched from pupae that overwintered in the soil. Looking similar to common houseflies, they first visit flowers to feed on nectar. But then, when mated, the females go off to find young brassica plants where they'll lay their eggs into the soil around the stems. These hatch into little white maggots that then feed on the roots, gradually weakening the plant by starving it of water and nutrients. Over the following weeks, the maggots mature, then disperse within the soil to pupate, leaving an often stunted and wilted plant behind them. Without the option of using soil-incorporated pesticides, or in fact any other method to control the underground maggots, it's essential to preempt an infestation by stopping the adult flies from successfully laying their eggs into the soil in the first place. And this can be done quite simply by creating a barrier around the brassicas when they're first planted, either by using a fabric disc known as a cabbage collar, or by spreading a layer of non-absorbent substrate around the stems. This will then block the flies from accessing the soil and cause any eggs that might have been laid onto the barrier to rapidly desiccate and die.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.